Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. The three most influential jazz guitar players from the 80s on, so modern jazz guitar from that period, would probably be Pat Metheny, John Scofield and Bill Frisell. In this video I'm going to take a look at a Bill Frisell solo. It's a solo on the jazz standard How Deep Is the Ocean? And I think the examples that are in here are really sort of showcasing some of the things that defines his style in terms of some traditional influences and also quite a sophisticated look at harmony, but also his use of chord voicings while soloing and using several voices in his solos. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, improve the way that you solo and check out some interesting arpeggios and chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. This solo is off an album that's part of a series that Paul Motian did, because he did with pretty much the same people, also with Charlie Haden. So Charlie Haden, Paul Motian, Joe Lovano and Bill Frisell. They did a series of albums called On Broadway, where they're pretty much just playing standards. And you definitely want to check out these albums because they are in many ways pretty simple, but because of the performers that are in there, it's also extremely strong and good examples of how Bill Frisell would work on a standard. This specific version of How Deep Is the Ocean is actually from an album where they also have Lee Konitz on alto saxophone. I guess these five people are also part of really the same scene in New York. This first phrase is already from the second bar of the solo, so that's on a 2-5-1 in C minor. So he's kind of concluding some messing around with a G and a D that he starts the solo with, and then he does that by making this sort of trill, which is, I think, fairly clearly just C minor. It's all coming out of a C minor triad with an added 9, and then from there we first just get a chord, really just to give us the C minor sound. Here's one of the places where I think he's using a chord just to convey the color of the harmony, and it's not really a part of the melody line. There's a place later in this example where I think it is a part of the melody line, and you'll see that also in the other examples. So first we get that, and then we get some slightly curious notes, but that's a triplet movement, and I think the easiest way to think of this is actually that this phrase is a part of a B-flat minor pentatonic phrase, and then he's going on with the same thing, move down a half step, and here we're on the A half diminished, so here it starts to make a little bit more sense. What's happening here, he does that in both places where this happens in the song or in the solo, is that this place in the song will be C minor for one bar and then A half diminished to D7. And the way you would usually hear a bass player play this would be C minor to C minor with B flat in the bass to A half diminished to D7. And then when you hear that, you can of course make the C minor with B flat in the bass into a B flat minor, and that's really what's happening here. So he's not playing anything on the C minor besides the chord, and then we get this phrase, which to me at least is really a B flat minor pentatonic, and then moving on to this. Often you'll hear people really turning it into A minor also, to just really a lot of parallel. You can't really tell if he does that here, but the phrase kind of suggests it a bit. Then we get a conclusion of that, and he actually just sticks with this triplet phrase. So we get this, and then on the D7 we get another triplet and same notes. So the melody actually continues here, which I think is a nice detail, resolving it to the third of the G minor chord, so G minor 6. And you can also tell there's an E later in the melody. That's it. And then to E half diminished. And then from here, just this really basic repeating of the third on the A half diminished, and then ending with the D7 voicing, the D7 sharp 9 like this. And here you also really, in my opinion, have like an example of how he'll just harmonize the last note in the phrase. This phrase is really an example of how Bill Frisell is using both harmonized lines and using intervals to harmonize things, but also where that just gradually evolves into using two separate voices in a solo. So the first part is coming out on the A half diminished, and that's just this 6 interval, and then this D7, which is essentially a D7 flat 13, what he's playing here, and then resolving the B flat down to the A, and then we get this 6 interval, moving to the G minor 7, and now we get to the point where it starts to become two separate voices, because in the beginning it was just really a harmony put under the melody notes, but now the top part starts to move by itself, and then that continues on the G minor C7 because it's the same melody, and then we get this part where the lower voice starts to move independently as well. So he moves to this F minor 7 voicing, and then moves the A flat down to G. To me, it's really interesting to see how Bill Frisell and Scofield both rely a lot on using intervals, and especially using sort of the 6 and 7 intervals in their playing. At the same time, they sound completely different, and they do pretty different things with them, which is also nice to see that you can actually check out something and then end up in a completely different place with the same material. The reason I can keep on publishing videos every week is that I have a community of people over on Patreon that are supporting the channel. I'm very grateful for that, and if you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. If you join us over on Patreon, then I can also give you something in return for your support. This example really highlights how Bill Frisell is also at the same time really a very traditional player, because it comes in on a place where we have G minor to C7, and Charlie Hayden is also playing the G to C, but at the same time Bill Frisell is just thinking of it in the traditional way of just ignoring the 2 chord and just playing the 5 chord. So he starts with these 2 notes, the B flat and the E, to just get the C7 out there, adding this C on top. I think actually this is something that's very typical for the way that Bill Frisell probably constructs his lines. At least that's how I think he does it. Is that he'll play a lot of times he'll play the basic part of the chord on the middle string set, and then it's kind of open what else is going to be put in on top of that. So he's quite flexible in terms of just having these 2 notes in there, and then thinking of that as one layer, and then being able to add on it. And I think that's also what's happening here. So he's arpeggiating that, and then adding a quick scale run down to the flat 13, and then we get sort of a really straight ahead bob line, which could be straight out of a Joe Pass book, resolving to the subdominant. In this case, the subdominant is then an F minor chord, so F minor 7, and the way he plays it, that's another thing that's great. This is immediately going away from the bob material, because he's just going into playing an F minor triad, so sorry, that's the slides later. It's also nice to see that he's really using the entire range of the instrument in this way. So there's always this really guitaristic way of playing the instrument, and using the entire instrument, using several voices, and also using the entire range. So we get the F minor triad down to the low A flat here, and then the final part of the line is also a really typical Bill Frisell thing, because it's a chord voicing using open strings. So he starts with these 2 notes, and then he already has the B flat as well, probably at least, and then adding that in there, and then we get the A flat, B flat, and B next to each other on the A flat minor chord. So we have the 4 minor taking us back to 1. And I think this idea of, and you hear that all the time in his playing, he's really checked out how to use open strings to get certain sounds out, and he's very good at also just applying that in the right place, because I think we're a little bit used to in jazz that we practice things in all 12 keys, and we can we only practice things that we can move around and that we can only that we can use everywhere. And this is actually the opposite of that. As soon as you start using open strings, then most of the time there's like only a few places where you can apply it, and you have to check everything out separately in that way. But I think Bill Frisell is extremely good at this, and that's worthwhile checking out. It's becoming more and more common. Also, you'll hear Julian Lage do it quite often as well. If you want to check out another video on a guitar player who also uses a lot of intervals and also several voices in his solos, then check out this video on John Scofield, where I'm analyzing some phrases from a solo over a B-flat blues. If this is the first time you see one of my videos and you want to learn more about jazz guitar, then subscribe to my channel. And if you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching, and until next week.